We are at an interesting time when it comes to this dance thing and working with government. If we think about the countdown that's currently happening in terms of the mayoral race, we are going to get a new mayor, we're going to get a new council, we're going to get new mandates, and that itself provides plenty of opportunities for us to imagine what kind of city do we want to live in, and how is it that we can work with City Hall and with each other to make it happen. We just had a provincial election, and we just saw mandate letters from the Premier to various ministers, so we have a pretty clear sense of where the politics and the bureaucracy of the province will be moving, which is encouraging, because there are a lot of words that are included in those mandate letters that are words that I think speak to our sector and that we need to keep an eye on. And of course, there's a federal election on the horizon as well, an economic statement coming. Our federal government is going to be the first government in a very long time that will actually be not in the red, but in the black. And I think that will raise a whole number of questions about social investment and priorities and where it is that we want to go with all of this. So it's going to be an exciting time. And it's very important for us as a community sector, because we are so connected to what's happening every day in our communities, because we have the experience of testing out a whole lot of ideas, and because, quite frankly, we know how to organize and we know how to push things to really be at our very best. So I come here today to just share some of my thinking, and I really look forward to the discussion, because I know there's a lot of knowledge and expertise in the room. And I'll give you my 5 good ideas for getting on the public policy dance floor. My first one is know your stuff and bring solutions, or as my wife was saying last night, be smarter than they are. We live in an age when we can no longer assume or expect that we're going to tell government what to do, and they're going to go turn around and just do all the hard work and just deliver it. The reality is that governments are busy. They have many priorities. The complexities that we face in our communities are just as difficult as they are for governments. And so it's really important for us to think about how it is that we frame the challenges that we see every day in our communities in a way that's compelling and that opens the door in terms of government's interest in these issues. But opening the door is only the first step, and we really can't stop there. It's very important for us to come to the table with solutions, and with solutions that, yes, start with commitments and values and aspirations, but really drill down in terms of some of the implementation details. And that's hard. That's hard because that means that we have to be in conversations that really bridge the worlds of policy expertise, of implementation, of lived experience, and those conversations aren't always easy because different people are at different levels. Some people really like to get into the weeds in terms of what's the turning point and how do we phase it in and how much is it going to cost, and other people just need to see things done now. That's a real tension in terms of doing this work. It's a tension that doesn't get resolved in a 2-hour meeting. It's a tension that's ongoing, but one that's very important that we pay attention to. So we really do need to be the experts. And I mentioned the community benefits agreement off the top. It's been one of those examples where we've certainly had the frame down packed. We at United Way had been doing, like many others, work in the inner suburbs in Toronto, where we've seen there's been a large concentration of poverty and a lack of services. And over the past decade, we've been able, very deliberately, and through a wide range of partnerships, to begin to fill some of those gaps and really close the gaps that exist in our city. But as we went back to refresh our strategy and talk to many of the residents who are now our partners in the inner suburbs, we heard community hubs are terrific, community gardens are amazing, we're organizing and talking about the issues that matter to us, but we really need jobs, and we really need economic opportunity. And along came this hole that's being drilled right across Eglinton that just happened to cut right through 5 priority neighborhoods. And of course we connected the dots and said, there's going to be huge demand for high-skilled labor when it comes to the trades. There's very high unemployment rates in terms of some of these priority neighborhoods. It's up to us to really connect the dots between those two and make sure that people can find jobs and employers can find people to fill those jobs. So it's been fascinating to watch government and Metrolinx and labor and the community really organize and rally around this concept and say this is a really good idea. But that's just the beginning. The hard work is to actually make those connections happen, to think about workforce development and training in new ways, to think about outreach strategies to communities that sometimes don't get a knock on their doors, and really engage them in the opportunities. All of these are really new ways of working, and they require us to roll up our sleeves and really be part of the solution, and come to the table as the experts. And we're going to have to do that a lot more. We saw in the recent poverty reduction strategy provincially very aspirational commitments, ending homelessness, continuing to drive a child poverty commitment, getting really good in terms of measuring our impact as a sector so we can make a strong case. Those are certainly things that I think need to get done, probably things that everybody in this room thinks need to get done. But of course, the details is what's really going to matter, and it's really important for us to figure out how we become part of the solution and how we bring solutions to the table. My second idea is when it comes to engaging government and doing government relations, how often do we sit down in the City Hall cafeteria or a McDonald block or in a second cup right before a meeting with a government official and figure out, you're going to say this and I'm going to say that and you're going to say this, and then at the end maybe we'll sort of hear from them. I suggest that we sort of need to turn that on its head a little bit, and we need to be really good listeners, and that's my second idea. I think effective engagement with policymakers is really about relationship building, and you can't really build relationships by just talking at people. You can't really build relationships just through one-off meetings. It's very important that we balance the formal and the informal, and that we really understand that mandates change. Ministers are shuffled. Political staffers have their own reality going on. Bureaucrats have a whole thing happening in those hallways of power. And in order for us to seize the moment, because timing really is everything when it comes to politics, we have to understand what's going on the other side. And we have to be able to seize the moment when it happens. I remember in the mid-2000s, there was an initiative that some of you may be familiar with. It was called MISWA, the Modernizing Income Security for Working Age Adults Task Force. It was a creation of David Pico and Susan Piggott, and they brought together just a real cross-section of all sectors in our city to model a conversation across sectors in terms of how we could reform income security. And over a period of about a year and a half, they had very intense conversations. They came up with a blueprint for change. And after the blueprint for change came out, David Pico spoke at the Canadian Club to a packed room. There were editorials in the Globe and Mail and the Star talking about the need to do this. But then there was a question about what needed to be done, because there was a long list of to-dos and there was a real need for scope and focus. There were some meetings that were convened after MISWA to try and figure out where we needed to go with this. And I remember that some of us were pushing for social assistance reform, minimum wage reform. We were pushing for increases in benefits. And Deb Matthews happened to be at the table at the time. She was an MPP, and she had come to listen and also to contribute. And during the conversation, she said, one of the things we've been looking at is this thing called the Ontario Child Benefit. And we really see some potential there. Some of the people around the table had seen potential around the Ontario Child Benefit, but many of us had been focusing on the multitude of other issues. The ability for the sector, for the movement, to really seize that moment, to listen to where government was going, and to have the discipline and the commitment to get behind an idea like the Ontario Child Benefit was really important, because it did require us to sort of drop a lot of the other things we were doing, to redo our postcards, to have new conversations in terms of some of our coalitions. But in the end, it really paid off. The Ontario Child Benefit is a very significant initiative, and we've seen how a tool like that has really helped to mitigate and prevent child poverty even during the recent recession. My third contribution to this conversation is the importance of building social movements. You can't do this by yourself, and there are lots of positives in terms of us working together. One of them, which is maybe not one that we usually start with when we talk about political movements or social movements, is reality checking ourselves. How often do we come to the table with our own agendas, with our own to-do lists? And in some ways, it's like going back to university in the political clubs, where you go to everybody else's political club and you hand out your lit. This is a more sophisticated way, right, in terms of how that works. But in terms of movement building, it's really an opportunity to step back and think about how do I leverage these other very smart people around the table to reimagine my own stance on issues and how it is that we can find better alignment and move things forward. Obviously very important in terms of sustaining our momentum. We're never going to be able to carry this on our own back. It's key in terms of tapping into different skills and perspectives, and it's also more fun. Anytime that you have a win and that you're moving progress, it sure feels a lot better to share that experience and share that celebration with many others who've been through the struggle with you, rather than just packing it in and showing up the next morning and trying it all over again. My own experience in terms of social movements is, and many of you are experts at this, is when you're sitting, don't approach it as just a meeting. Don't go to the quarterly meeting of the coalition and then go back to your job and just assume that stuff is going to get done. Some of the stuff that is most creative and has the most impact is actually when people around the table just pick up various pieces and really show some commitment, show some leadership, and just dive right in. One of my most profound experiences around movement building has been the 25 and 5 Network for Poverty Reduction. And one of the reasons for that is because this has been, since the very beginning, a network with no funding, no staff, no preset quarterly meetings. There's almost a postmodern approach to how we build meaning and how we build agendas around that table. But what's really important about it is that we know, because there are a few resources, that number one, we're all committed to the issue of advancing poverty reduction and elimination. We also know that if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And so I always get inspired by my colleagues around the table, because the list of to-dos is always this high, because we always have lots of ideas. But the action items at the end of the meeting are the best part, because the only way that to-do list is going to get done is if people actually roll up their sleeves and commit to carve out some time in their daily work to actually advance the agenda. The beauty of movements like 25 and 5 and many others is that you do have a variety of skills around the table. Some people are really good at research, some people are really good at policy analysis, some people are really good at community engagement. And it's the coming together of all of those various pieces and people actually doing it and owning it that is beautiful. So rolling up your sleeves and diving right in is key. Different times call for different tactics. To segue from 25 and 5, we've always had this tension in our own network about opposition versus proposition. What are we about? Are we here to really, push hard on government and tell them what they're not doing, or are we here to really engage and say we're partners in terms of helping you make it happen? And that's a tension that is very healthy. If everybody understands that is the sort of MO that we're working under. For me, it's always the wrong conversation to say that my tactic is stronger than your tactic, and it's always better to understand that a diversified portfolio of advocacy strategies is what makes a movement or a coalition or a network more nimble, more adaptive, more ready to seize different moments, and that's what really makes a difference. You can think about the whole advocacy continuum. There's research, there's people who are really good at lobbying, there's people who are really good at organizing, there's people who are really good at the whole public education thing, media relations, social media. At any one point in these very long struggles that we're all involved in, you're going to need to pull out one of those tools. I remember at 25 and 5, one of the first pieces of the toolkit that we used was just like organize, bring hundreds of people into the room right down at 900 Bay in the Ontario room and just get the issue on the front page of the newspaper, get everybody excited, get everybody talking. And those were very exciting days. And then the recession came. And we really needed to make a case that it's not that you can't afford to invest in poverty reduction, you actually can't afford not to. And we sort of switched the MO and did a cost-benefit analysis on what poverty costs our province on an annual basis. And of course, it was in the billions of dollars. The story on the front page went from 500 people 500 people release their vision for a poverty reduction strategy to poverty reduction or poverty costs Ontario $18 billion annually. So different times will call for different measures. And it's really important not to get stuck in some of the conversations that sometimes we get stuck in about which tactic is most effective. Different tactics for different times. My fifth is celebrate, and I think this is a common idea through these series because obviously this is hard work, and we're at it for a long time, and it's really important for us to mark some of our successes. But the reason why celebration is really important in terms of my own work, and sometimes I've been accused of being the chief cheerleader, is because change never happens, or I should say change very rarely happens all at once. In the words of the Caledon Institute, if you really want to understand change, you have to understand the concept of relentless incrementalism. And relentless incrementalism is it's a funny thing because when you're all in and you're pushing on an issue that's taken years, decades to get to where it is right now, of course we know the solution and how much it costs and what it's going to take, but odds are it's not going to happen all at once. And when you're really all in, you've put all of your energy, you've put in a lot of trust in at the table, you've worked long days, and you may not move as far as you thought you were going to move. And that can be dispiriting. It can be discouraging. One of the things I often tell my colleagues is, if you smell victory, it means you need to get ready to negotiate and probably compromise, because it's not going to look exactly like you want it to look on the other end. And it's very important that we see ourselves as part of a very long struggles, as part of a very long history, and as part of a legacy of change making. And as much as we should aspire to get as much done as we can during the time that we're here, we also need to understand that change, especially when it comes to government relations, especially when it comes to public policy, usually happens one or two steps at a time. So for me, one of the key questions is, are we moving forward? Are we opening doors? Are we creating an opportunity for this to be a step towards change and not stopping? And my advice and my tip, I mentioned that sometimes I am accused of being the chief cheerleader, is that we need more. We need more morale captains in our movement because it can be hard. And morale captains are people who need to give credit to all of the efforts that happen around the table, both the ones that people see and the ones that people don't see. It's pointing ahead, and it's also raising a glass and toasting whenever it is that we're moving forward. Before we move to questions, I'll finish off with a quote. And Martin Luther King Jr. has many, many quotes. There's one particular one I like, which I think is fitting for this talk. There were a lot of wins that were happening on paper during the civil rights movement, but the actual lived experience of people in the early and mid '60s didn't quite match up with the legislation that was changing, and people were getting beaten up, and they kept showing up, and it was hard and it was frustrating, and there was a lot of questioning at times of which is the right tactic and which isn't. But there was a very vibrant movement, and at one point, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you got to keep moving forward." And I think that those are very powerful and compelling words, even this many decades afterwards. So I was asked to provide you with a few questions just to stimulate some of your conversations at the table. And I think that the hope is that we'll talk for 15 to 20 minutes. Yes? 25 to 30 minutes. And grab yourself a drink or a sandwich. The questions that I would, I'm going to describe the questions that I suggest you may want to talk about, and then afterwards we'll invite you and we'll do a go-around in terms of some of the ideas that you came up with and some of the real highlights. If you could actually find a person at your table who's probably going to get nominated by all the others to be sort of the recorder and the bringer together of the ideas, that will be your first task. And then I have 3 questions, and feel free to go through each one of them. I think they're at your tables, or to pick one and really go after that one. I've described 5 ideas. The first one, and my first question is about examples in your own work where you've had some experience in terms of working through some of those ideas, and what have you learned, and what has worked, and what hasn't, and so just some of your reflections on some of the things I just talked about. The second one, of course, is what are additional good ideas when it comes to public policy making and really getting the community sector to engage government. I'd love to hear how we make the 5 list a 10 list. And finally, we talked about how it takes 2 to tango, and we've been sort of doing a lot of introspection today. But it's also very important that we provide some advice to government in terms of what they could do to really enable them to hear more from us and to open the door in terms of some of the conversations. And I have my own ideas around that, but I would love to hear some of yours. Without further ado, it's over to you. You have about 25 minutes. I will give you a 5-minute signal, and then let's have a conversation. Thank you.